Welcome, Nick, to the Tiny Fit Diva podcast. I'm super happy to have you on today.
I'm super happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Kylene.
So Nick and I met at Mindshare last week, and I'm just going to be honest, you guys, pretty much every guest that you're going to hear from now until 2019 is probably going to be some really cool person that I met at Mindshare, because there were just so many interesting practitioners there. It was just really fun to get to meet everybody. But I think it was the last night, actually, that we were there that Nick and I met, and he was talking about his passion for brain health, and particularly in children. And I really was excited to learn more, so I wanted to have him on to share it with all of you. So really quickly, let me read his bio for you. Nicholas Hundley, MSCNS, is a biochemist, nutritionist, and wellness teacher who is deeply committed to transforming lives through optimizing health. After obtaining his graduate degree in biochemistry, he obtained his certified nutrition specialist credential and focused his learning on understanding and addressing the root causes of illness using functional methods. Nicholas has received advanced training in functional medicine, nutrition, nutrigenomics, mental health, integrative medicine, autism, and neurology. By utilizing advanced blood, urine, and genetic analysis, Nicholas identifies and treats the unique root causes of health conditions and sees remarkable transformations in his clients' health. He helps people with a wide range of conditions and has special expertise in brain-related disorders, mood, attention, anxiety, insomnia, autism, Alzheimer's, etc., infertility and autoimmune disease, fatigue, and allergy. His friendly manner, dedicated concern, and detailed insight make healing a pleasant process. He's also the founder of Mind Whale Clinic in Salt Lake City, Utah. So that's a lot. But, I think it's really fun when you find what you're really, really passionate about. You just continue to learn. You continue to get extra certifications. You continue to expand that knowledge base.
Right.
I think when you really dial it in, it's pretty cool. So I'm really excited to talk to you. But before we do that, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So, Nick and I decided we were going to read High Performance Habits of by Brendan Burchard.
Yeah.
At the conference, and so I started reading that, and I was reading some of it this morning, and I wanted to know, are you through the clarity section where he's talking about seeking clarity?
I'm in chapter probably 2, and so he's mentioned it, but is that the first section that he goes into detail on?
Yeah, it's section 1. So I don't know. It's kind of weird the way he has it organized in terms of chapters. I'm not sure what that would be considered. But this is where he was talking. He's saying that high performers basically, they have more clarity about their future self. And so if you start to feel like you're struggling or you're frustrated or you're hitting a wall, often it's because we've stopped having this goal of improvement. And so one of the exercises that he asks you to do, and I thought this was really cool, was to think about your relationships in your spouse, your kids, at work, whatever it is, and think about how they are now and maybe how you want to improve them. And then think about, your future self and your optimal, what you would like to perceive yourself or how you would like to perceive yourself in the future. And then he says, if you could describe yourself in just 3 aspirational words that would sum up who you are at your best in the future, what would those words be? I thought that was really cool. And if you haven't gotten there, I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but you know what your words would be? What's your aspiration for the future?
Yeah, so I have not gotten there. So the 3 words, you're asking what the 3 words?
Yeah, what would your 3 words be?
For the future. Wow.
Yeah. It's basically asking, who do you want to be? See, for me, I chose things that I feel like I need to work on, and that gives me something to sort of focus on. So for me, it's focused, because I think a lot of times in my work environment, particularly since I'm self-employed, it's very, very easy to get distracted. It's very easy to want to do 1,000 things at one time versus just making sure I focus on one and get it done. I want to be more giving and, thoughtful of other people. So giving was my second word, and confident. I actually struggle often with, self-confidence in my abilities and my potential for the future and things like that. So those are the 3 words that I chose because I wanted to sort of have those in the front of my mind going forward.
Nice. Yeah, I love the word focus. That's been a struggle for me most of my life. And I think it's a good thing for me to develop. I'm someone who's pretty aware of my weaknesses and shortcomings, and that's can be a good thing, but it's also sometimes easy to focus on those, right?
Yep.
And so I think focus is one that I'm aware of in myself. I tend to just be easily distracted, and we'll see how well I do on this podcast, right?
Right. We'll edit out all the ADT moments.
So focus, yes, is a good one. For me as well, a big one for me would be compassion. And I tend to be compassionate towards other people, but early on in my life, I gained a habit of being hard on myself for some reason. And so I actually have, you can't see it, but behind you, I have compassion and focus written on a piece of paper on the wall as a reminder. And because I'm hard on myself and it's not good, there's no reason to. And so the third word would probably be love, because you can't go wrong with that, right? I think
that covers a multitude of goals right there. Yeah.
And maybe I'm thinking that because of Brendan's talk where he had the near-death experience and he was bleeding, standing on the hood of his car. I don't want to be too gory for your podcast, but it was a very, I guess you should, listeners, maybe listen to his version of it, but he just realized in that moment that, had he lived, had he loved, and did he matter? Those were the questions that he had. And so, I think love is a choice, and we can choose to love ourselves. We can choose to love the people we come in contact with, our family. And that's a lesson that I've, has really been salient for me lately, is, how much choice we have over what we feel and what we think and things like that, which is interesting because at the same time, I'm a brain health expert and I know that people feel really bad when their brain isn't healthy. And it's hard to be optimistic if your neurotransmitters aren't working right. Good examples are if you're sick with the flu or if you're sleep deprived, you're just not going to feel good. You're not going to be happy. You're not going to be optimistic and positive. But yet at the same time, we also do have that choice as well. So I think finding that balance is something that's good to recognize. And again, there's compassion woven through all of that. Not beating ourselves up over, not feeling the way we should or doing things the way we should or not being good enough and things like that. Is that a good answer to your question?
So you already have 2 of them on the wall. You just have to write down the 3rd one. There you go.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
No, but you're absolutely right. There's this cyclical pattern, I think, where it all ties together. Your health can affect your brain and your brain can affect your health. There's so much in terms of, if you have something with my focus being the gut, there's so much in terms of what's going on there can affect your moods. But it's also like the opposite direction. If you choose to view things in a positive way and you really, really make an effort to have a positive outlook, you're probably going to heal more quickly. And so it's just, you kind of have to do both at the same time, I think, and they then feed each other. But yeah, that's absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. So tell everybody about you. Who is Nick? Share your story. How did you get here? What caused this, a desire to learn more about the brain? Where'd that come from?
Yeah. So, to put it succinctly, I was messed up myself. And
Aren't we all?
that's why I do it. What I do. Yeah, it's true. I think, you know, we make our own mess our message. I've heard that said before, right? Um, yeah. So speaking of what we were just talking about, when I was younger, I was pretty miserable emotionally. Um, and I was trying to figure out what it was. Looking back, there was lots of different reasons. Um, and as a kid, I feel like I had learning disabilities. It was not diagnosed, but in certain areas, I was pretty slow as a young kid in elementary school. Of course, I have my own intelligences. There's multiple intelligences. I have my certain geniuses, but I had issues there. And then I had anxiety, early teens, which are hard for almost everyone. I had like major anxiety, social anxiety. It was really, really hard for me. And that also spun off into depression and suicidality even. And just a really, really hard time. I was constantly babying my emotions, so to speak, you know, just very sensitive and not happy. And so I would try lots of different things to feel better, right? I try spirituality, try thinking differently. And it got to the point where it drove me nuts when people said, you know, just look on the bright side or be happy, because I felt like that didn't work. And I think that there is some truth to that, but it's not the whole story. And it ended up that, you know, spirituality did help, certain forms of it. I read a lot of self-help books, and that helped a lot as well. But there was just always something nagging. Like I always had this background anxiety and just unsettled feeling. You know, I never felt good. I also had a ton of physical symptoms as well, and I didn't make the connection between them at a young age. I thought they were separate, and that's what most people think, right? Like, you know, I've got my eczema and then I've got my anxiety, and they don't think that there could be some link there between the two, between physical symptoms. I had a lot of digestive symptoms for, you know, from age 5 on, and hypoglycemia, lots of different issues physically as well. And I had an interest in health. I was a scientist. I started studying science, and I really, over the years, and it took a long time, kind of figured myself out. And it's surprising looking back how long it took as a scientist. And I think, man, people are screwed if they have these issues that are causing their problems, and how hard it was to figure out, you know, what the root cause of my anxiety was and depression. Turns out it is a mixture of those things. You know, I see it as there's spirituality, there's psychology and thought processes. And then the third arena is the physical aspect. You know, our brain is an organ, just like any other organ in the body. And if the brain isn't healthy, the symptoms are in emotions and behaviors. Sometimes there will be weird neurology symptoms like tics, or, in the case of autism, there's stimming and flapping. There's other things that we might, the average person, we might see as, oh, that's something wrong with the brain. Something's happening with the brain. But emotionally, usually we think it's strictly, oh, I just need to think on the bright side, or I need to see a therapist, which is great. I think therapy is awesome. But there's this other area that a lot of people, we aren't really aware of, that if the brain is inflamed, or if we don't have the right nutrients to create neurotransmitters or other things, then it's just not going to function right. So that was the case with me. And that's why I do what I do. It took me forever to figure out, peeling the layers of the onion, why I had such anxiety. And it did have to do with gut issues that I had. Lots of food sensitivities, getting rid of that, just getting the inflammation down in the body really helped my brain. So, of course, I still have, psychological junk. Life's a journey. We're always getting better and improving. So, and that's always there, and that's always fun, right? But looking back at,
I don't feel like anyone ever arrives. I mean, I really don't. And particularly in this community, I think there's so much personal motivation from our own histories. You know, I do gut health because what did I struggle with? Hormones and gut health. You do brain health because you struggled with what? Emotions and brain health. And so I think that's an ongoing journey where we just never feel like we've arrived. There's always more to learn. There's always more to tweak. And I think especially when you get into the health community, you're like, all right, I'm good. I can sort of settle here, but I want to biohack and make sure I'm like, you know, 1,000,000%, like 100% is not good enough, you know? And so you kind of go down that rabbit hole too. But then there's also like the emotional fulfillment you get from passing that along, which also helps your own health when you're able to help other people. So it's all kind of connected for sure. But yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I'm still working on my own gut too.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yep. So yeah, so that's why I do what I do. I help, primarily I like to focus on pediatrics, which would be young adults down to, you know, kids and even toddlers. I'm, like you said, I'm a nutritionist and a biochemist, and I ordered labs. It can be urine labs, blood labs, whatever we need. And then I do extensive assessments to figure out what is causing a particular person's symptoms, whether it be ADD or autism or just depression, anxiety.
Yeah, now I totally just want to be like, hey, can you run a bunch of labs on me and tell me what you find? Because I love doing that, because I run labs in my work as well, and it's so much fun to me. I don't know if you think that it's just wildly exciting, but if I had like all the money in the world and all the time in the world, I would just constantly be running, just because I think it's really interesting. Not even necessarily that you need all of them at some point, but so what labs do you like to use? Is it very individualized, or is there a certain set that's sort of your baseline that you like to have?
Yeah, there's both. Depending on and I try to budget with people too, depending on their budget. So some people will, you know,
let's say budget's not an issue. What would be your ultimate, like what's the dream package that gives you the most information?
Okay. So I have a pretty broad blood panel.
Okay.
And that would maybe be $250 to $300 is all. So, I mean, for the amount of information you get, that one's really good. And that
so that's
one,
like all your basic blood nutrients, right? That's kind of what you'd be.
Yeah, like CBC, ferritin, the comprehensive metabolic panel, and lactate dehydrogenase. Look at the full thyroid panel. It's about 6 or 7 thyroid markers. We suspect autoimmunity. I'll look at the TPO and look at ANA and things like that. And then there's inflammatory markers in the blood. Homocysteine is one. There's also HSCRP. And I also really like to look at whole blood histamine, because that can give an indication of methylation status and also how well they're breaking down histamine. I like to look at copper and zinc in relation to brain health and ceruloplasmin. If we see the amount of free copper, that can indicate some inflammation going on. The person probably needs antioxidants. And then a lot of people, probably because of copper pipes and stress and other things, have not enough zinc and maybe too much copper. So I look at the ratio there, because that can have an effect on brain health and emotions. So that's mostly it for the blood work. There's a few more in there, maybe. And then, you know, the other more specialty labs like functional testing is really on a case-by-case basis. The organic acids test can give some indication of gut health, primarily with yeast and also candida and Clostridia. And that's a good one. It also gives indicators of mitochondrial health and overall metabolism. And then it does give a lot of certain nutrient markers. So we can see kind of how they're B12 and B6 and glutathione and even a little bit of the methylation in there with the folate markers. So that's a good one. And that one's really good for, someone who has more severe issues, possibly. Because sometimes people will come back looking pretty good on the organic acids test. But if they have mitochondrial issues or dysbiosis, then yeah, we'll see some good information on that one. Other tests, the GI map stool test is really good.
We talked about that a lot on this. That's my favorite.
Oh yeah, good. Yeah, I'm really impressed with that. I like it.
It just covers so many bases. I think so much more than other stool tests.
Right. Yeah, so that's a good one to get with people. And then if we're suspecting food sensitivities, I'll give people the choice. You can do an elimination diet, which is actually the gold standard if you do it right, and stuff. Or
if you do it right is so key. I was just talking to someone the other day because it's like elimination diets are great, but so many people just view it as another diet. And then, on day 31, they're like, oh, I'll just go back to eating what I was eating before. That's not the point. That doesn't teach you anything. That just means you were like really strict on your life for 30 days, but you didn't learn anything. You have to bring the foods back in and be careful to understand and learn how to listen to your body.
Yeah, good point. Exactly. But there's also an IgG food sensitivity test that I can run. That's a good one for a lot of people. And then more specialty labs if I'm dealing with autoimmunity. And autoimmunity is everything from autism to rheumatoid arthritis to lupus. There's so many different forms of autoimmunity. There are good panels by Cyrex Labs. They have some good autoimmunity panels.
And what are you looking for in those? The antibodies or?
Yes. So if they, depending on the symptoms that they're having, there are antibodies that target different parts of the body. So if they're having more mental, neurological, emotional symptoms, and we're suspecting autoimmunity, there's panels that test for AZL, local ganglioside antibodies that affect the neurons, myelin basic protein. There's other neurological tests for that as well. And then also gluten testing is good too. So the Cyrex Labs has a good gluten panel that it will test probably about 30 different antibodies related to gluten sensitivity, whereas most labs, it's probably like 2.
I was going to say that one, it is the most comprehensive, I think, isn't it, in terms of getting the most data on any reaction that you may have towards that.
Right.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of times people I'll run a food sensitivities test, but a lot of food sensitivities tests just screen for one particular reaction. And there's so many different ways that your body can respond to food. And so sometimes people will get this test back and it will say, according to this particular reaction that it's screening for, you're not sensitive to wheat. And I say, don't listen, take it out anyway. And then if you really want to, you can bring it back in and see how you feel. But I don't think I've ever met anybody that hasn't seen a positive reaction from eliminating it from their diet.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Gluten is hard for the vast majority of people to handle, especially at the levels that we're eating at these days.
Well, and that's just, partially, obviously, it's in a lot more foods. There's processed food and it's in everything you have. But then the other part of that is the hybridization of the plant itself. It used to not have as much gluten in it as it does. So even if you ate the same amount as you did 50 years ago, you'd still be exposed to more of it. So it's multiplied by 1 million.
I think we were talking about that the other day at the military.
Yeah, it blows my mind. I'm about to go to another conference, and Dr. Tom, I don't know if you've heard of him, he's going to speak. And he was actually at Mindshare too, but he is like an expert on that. So I'm interested to listen to him, but his big platform is Go Gluten Free. And he talks a lot about the science behind wheat and the problems that it causes and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, you know, we're finding too that, you know, people can go over to Europe and not have as much of an issue, but it's a different plant, and they grow it differently and they process it differently. And it's just it's a whole different world.
Yeah, I mean, if I can indulge and tell my story of gluten, I think it's kind of interesting.
Have at it.
I had gut issues growing up, right? Went to a doctor and I said, you know, I think it might be celiac. So tested for celiac, and what do you think he came back with? It was negative.
Yeah, sure.
They had no idea what was going on with my gut. So, and you know, and that was kind of
does that not just totally frustrate you though, looking back? And you think all the years that you were wasted, that you could have been healing then,
right? Yeah.
But at the same time, it's motivation for you in your practice now to not allow that to happen to somebody.
Exactly. I think of these innocent kids, you know, that's what motivates me. These little kids that are just suffering and they have no idea. Their parents have no idea.
Yeah.
So anyway, you know, fast forward a few years, I hear about the gluten thing. And I went gluten-free. I did an elimination diet, and it was hard, you know, like I'm a nutritionist, but I'm like the worst. Like,
yeah, I hear you.
Like, so it was so hard for me to go gluten-free. Anyway, so I did, and like I reintroduced gluten, and I did not feel anything different. I was like, I'm fine with gluten. It doesn't bother me at all. So that was my conclusion after doing the elimination of it. Turns out I was sensitive to like so many different things. I think just taking out gluten and putting that one thing back in didn't move the needle enough for me looking back. But at the same time, I really, at this one point, I thought sourdough bread, like homemade sourdough bread, was super healthy. So I was just making it all the time. And, you know, I'd make a batch and I'd like eat it breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I would get this really, really odd taste in my mouth, like just really bitter and metallic taste. And I kind of put two and two together. It's like, okay, every time I eat a ton of bread for a few days after that, I get this really weird taste in my mouth. And I still don't know exactly what it was. But even at the time, I was like, maybe there's like some autoimmunity going on with my salivary glands, because it just intuitively, it felt like my salivary glands were not working right. It was just different. And there was maybe a little bit of pain in there and I didn't know what was going on. But yeah, sure enough, if I ate a lot of gluten, it had to be a lot, then I would get that. And there is something called, I believe it's called Sjogren's syndrome, where there's autoimmunity against the salivary glands. And so maybe that's what I was getting from gluten. And that's a common thing when people eat gluten. Upregulates the immune system. It causes leaky gut. It can contribute to a lot of autoimmunity. There's something called gluten ataxia when people have celiac, and it upregulates the immune system, and it causes attack on the cerebellum, and then the people can't, you know, walk as well. So that's an obvious neurological manifestation of a gluten sensitivity. And actually people can get it without and still test negative for celiac. But anyway, fast forward, I still keep eating gluten, just not that much, right? This is years ago. And then finally I did a test. I did an IgG food sensitivity test. And for me, it was dead on accurate. So because I'm so sensitive to so many foods, that's what made an elimination diet hard for me, because I was always having symptoms no matter what. I'm sensitive to eggs, nuts, I'm sensitive to dairy, gluten, a lot of different beans as well. I'm sensitive to from that test, and it was totally accurate. So I eliminated all those things. My symptoms went away, and if I add one of them back, I can feel it. Like eggs will make my ears hurt inside. And then after doing that, after eliminating all of that, I finally tested gluten again, the way it should be done, right? Eliminating everything and adding things one thing back at a time. And I immediately get this stitch in my side. Have you ever had a stitch in your side, like when you run?
Oh, sure.
Um, I had that all growing up, like constantly, like getting a stitch in my side. And I thought, oh, it's just because I was running or whatever. But I don't get them unless I eat gluten. Like I never get a stitch in my side at all.
Wow,
And so
that's
now if I
crazy.
eat gluten, I get that. And then it makes my joints hurt too. So,
Yeah, that's more common.
mhm,
A lot of
yeah,
people will experience the joint pain. That's so interesting. So
right.
I never really connected the whole you only did one at a time, because
Mhm,
most of the time when people remove it they see result.
mhm,
But that actually makes sense. If someone's prone to autoimmunity, everything's kind of upregulated, their immune system is going crazy, they have a ton of inflammation. I mean, there's just so much going on that if you take like one stone out of the pile, it may
yeah.
not really, demonstrate exactly what's going on. But if you're able to
Mhm.
kind of work through the process and calm the inflammation and really get your body to a healthy state, then when you bring everything back in, you'll be able to really identify it. So were you able at any point to heal your gut enough that you can bring some of those foods back in sometimes, or completely at all, or have you had to permanently eliminate most of those foods?
So yeah, so that's an exciting question because I've had to completely eliminate them, and it's I still react, and it's to the point where I can easily kind of get bored with my diet because it's restricted. I'm not getting more sensitivities. I'm pretty healthy. Feel a lot more healthy than I did before. Um, but it's the most annoying is like I can't eat almonds or
Oh,
walnuts
oh man. And on
or
like
like all
a
these
paleo
nuts.
diet, it's like, I can't have almonds. It's like in so many things. That's crazy.
Yeah,
Nuts, I
yeah,
think,
so,
are hard just in general for people. They're in so many foods, even if you want to get a packaged product.
yeah, and they're good for snacks, like
Right.
on the go and stuff. Um, so it was for years. It was in the back of my mind, like there's got to be a way to retrain the immune system to tolerate these things. I'm like, it's kind of not fair. Like I'm working so hard to eliminate these things, like, and it's working, but like there should be a way. Like it kind of sucks that once your immune system decides that something's bad, it's like always bad. Um, and of course, if you fix the leaky gut, usually, I mean, a lot of times people don't react as much because things aren't getting into the bloodstream. That's when it
Right.
gets really bad. Um, but I just wasn't, I just still can't eat those foods. So um, recently started learning about something called low dose immunotherapy. Have you heard about
Yeah,
it?
like that's what they do with peanut allergies in children, right? It's like, an eighth of a peanut and then like a quarter of a peanut. Is that what you're talking about?
I haven't heard that specific
Oh, okay.
example.
Where you low dose it until you can tolerate it, but it's very intentional, or is it something else? Is that what you're?
No, it might be that. So the way I'm actually learning how to do it right now,
Okay.
and started to do it with my patients, and I'm going to start doing it for myself um, for my food sensitivities. See how it works out. But it's that idea, but you take it and you basically just grind it up in water, and then you filter it, and then you get it really dilute, like super dilute, to where it kind of sounds like homeopathy, but it's different because there's more in there than there would be with homeopathy. But the idea is you get it so dilute that your immune system can still sense it, but it's at such a low concentration that it actually induces your helper T cells or your regulator T cells to, um, rather than stimulate an immune response, it will tell the immune system to tolerate it and say it's okay. So it deprograms it
And then do
from
you increase that over
essentially.
time?
No. So you usually how it works is you find a dose that works for that person.
Mm.
So once you find the dose that actually decreases the symptoms,
Hmm.
pretty much stay at that dose. And then you give doses about every 2 months. And then a lot of people can, over time, they can wean off of it.
Oh, wow.
So that's my
exciting.
next big project for myself.
Yeah, you have to keep me posted on that. Now, with some of your foods, did you ever experiment with like different types of cooking? Like I know with certain beans and legumes and things, they say that if you, what is it? If you cook them in a pressure cooker and cook them in broth and things like that, it negates a lot of the harmful things that you can react to. A lot of the components in the foods are broken down, and so you wouldn't have a strong reaction. Have you ever experimented with that?
Not a whole lot with that.
All of this is a lot of effort. It takes a lot of time.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different types. I'm sure you're aware, but just for the benefit of listeners, there's different types of sensitivity. So people talk about being sensitive to histamine, and then they talk about being allergic, and then there's lactose intolerant. And people can be sensitive to lectins. So you can be sensitive to lactose, lectins. You can be sensitive to certain types of fiber or starches. And I'm certainly sensitive to starches. So, and I don't think it's so much, I guess there could be an immune component. So it's complicated. You can be sensitive to certain gut flora. So like in Crohn's disease, there's an autoimmunity that's related to the actual bacteria in the gut. So that's one example, but so many autoimmune diseases, that's the case. And perhaps when you eat a certain food, you're not reacting to that food, but you're reacting to the fact that that food feeds a certain type of gut bacteria, and you're reacting to that gut bacteria. So that it's super complicated, right?
Yeah.
The IgG food sensitivity test, it doesn't test for lactose sensitivity because that's a different thing. That's an enzymatic problem. It's not a immunological problem. And then lectins, that's immunological, but it's different because it's not a direct, it's not an antibody mediated thing. It's something that stimulates certain people's immune systems, the lectins. And so I know if you process beans in a certain way, then it will reduce the lectins, for example. And so anyway, so it is complicated. And the IgG food sensitivity test that I did, it was really accurate for me. And so the way I understand it, for the most part, if I eat any of those foods, there's a certain protein sequence within the food that would be very difficult to actually break that apart and make me able to immunologically handle it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So yeah, anyway.
Well, there's so many, I mean, you just said it, there's so many different levels to it. Some people can go through, for example, an AIP diet, and it's extremely limiting. They can do that for 30 to 90 days and then bring 90% of the foods back in and be fine because they healed enough, and it was mostly an inflammatory gut reaction that just needed to be fixed.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
Yeah. And other people can have, like you're talking about, an actual issue breaking down the proteins in the food. And, so it's different for everybody. And I think that's so fascinating, I think, about what we do. Also can be very frustrating because it's not like you never have a blanket answer for your clients. And you have to just be willing to work with them, and they have to be patient with themselves because it can be a very long process to kind of figure out exactly what works for you long term. And the goal ultimately is to get as much variety in your diet as possible so you can get as many nutrients as physically able without causing yourself harm. And then once you figure out, what works for you, challenging it, every few months or a couple times a year, and then kind of resting in that and figuring out where you feel the most energy, where you get the best sleep, where your skin is clear, and all of those markers that we have, your gut feels good and all that kind of stuff. And then just kind of settle with it. And there's a point at which you kind of have to accept that your diet's probably going to be different than your friends, and traveling's going to be a little more tricky, and it just is what it is. But I think the payoff ends up being worth it in the end.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's so worth it for sure. I mean, and I always tell that to people because that was an issue with me. Years ago, it's like, yeah, I have to stop sugar, I have to stop eating dairy, I have to stop eating all these things. And I was always a sugar freak. I love sugar, and I didn't feel like I had a meal if I didn't have sugar, right? So, when I first started hearing about healthy eating, it's like, you can't have sugar. And I think maybe I'm projecting my own thoughts onto other people, but I'm like, maybe some people think life isn't worth living if you don't have sugar. So I always tell people, like, I promise you, it makes you so much happier once you figure it out.
Yeah.
And
life's worth living a lot more when you have energy and you don't have to run to the bathroom every 5 minutes, and you're not, having anxiety attacks, because you just had cake at your friend's house, Yeah.
Exactly.
It does end up carrying a lot of weight in the end when you kind of feel balanced, for sure.
Yeah. So that's why it's good for people to work with someone like you, because it is a long, hard process without help. And I think with help, it just makes it so much easier. So,
there's been many times where I talk to my husband and things, I'm like, man, I wish I had a me. Like, as my own coach, just because you know the answer, but you need to be walked through it. This is always hard to work, on yourself. You're your own worst client most of the time, and so yeah, totally.
Yeah, I'm thinking of mini me on your shoulder or something.
Right, exactly. So let's talk about some of your clients, and you specifically like to work with kids and young adults. So we just talk a lot about food sensitivity. So is there are there a lot of consistent similarities and themes that you see come out in your clients? Or there's some general recommendations that you make, or what do you kind of find as, you talk about finding the root causes? What's the pattern there?
Yeah, hands down, the root cause in a lot of these kids is diet. And what happens is these kids aren't absorbing well, and maybe they'll come down with anemia, or maybe their mom was even anemic during pregnancy. And anemia is, during pregnancy, or even just low iron, is a major cause of ADD in kids. So that's one main message for me, is like, before women get pregnant, they should have this blood panel done. Make sure that you have iron stores, you have zinc stores, you have enough iodine, that your thyroid is functioning. And it's just because it's just going to make a huge difference for the child. But root cause, one way or another, is usually some sort of dietary aspect. That said, there's different levels of it. Sometimes kids, and I like to catch them early before they get this immunological involvement, right? Because with me, it's like, at least up until now, I'm excited about the low dose immunotherapy, but once you get some sort of immune problem, it's hard to get rid of. And you can definitely lower the inflammation and improve symptoms and everything with something like the autoimmune paleo diet. But after the damage is done, you just have to be so much more strict, right? For example, in autism is, for the most part, it's an autoimmune condition where inflammation is affecting the brain, or in the past was affecting the brain, either in utero, because the mom had some sort of autoimmunity that was crossing the placenta and affecting the child's brain, or that can continue within the child's body, continuously. So let me try to recapture my train of thought. So with autism, a lot of these kids have to be really strict with their diet, just because their immune system is so sensitive. And so if they eat certain things like gluten or dairy, it can trigger the inflammation, and it can make symptoms worse, make the dysbiosis worse in the gut. And so ideally we get people before things are really bad, and we can kind of fix things up. And then the person has a lot more freedom in the rest of their life.
Yeah.
So, heaven forbid, they can eat an ice cream cone, right? Because for the most part, they're healthy and they're not immune reactive, and they can cheat a little bit some days without major issues. It is a slippery slope, so maybe that's not the best example, but there's different levels of issues with people. But if we can make sure that these kids have enough omega-3s, that they're getting probiotics, and they have a good healthy gut flora, that they're avoiding these triggers, these immune triggers. Usually a paleo diet works for most people, and it improves digestion, improves absorption, and these kids will just do so much better. So I have clients in my practice who if they can get on board with the dietary change, it just makes a massive difference.
Do you find resistance sometimes from the parents, just because parents that have, for example, like an autistic child, sometimes they can be very moody and very difficult depending on the level of autism and the level of expression. And so they can be really picky and choosy and upset about food changes. So do you ever find parents are like, gosh, this is just really hard. I can't, my kid will just scream and cry if I try to give them a healthy meal or take away their Cheez-Its, Do you have any tools, any sort of encouragement for those parents?
Yeah. Yeah, that is a hard one, and there are replacements, right? So if a child is stuck on goldfish, there are replacements, and any kid, if they have a preference, is going to give their parents a hard time. And the hard part is knowing, and I'm going to be the bad guy here, but usually your kid is not, no matter how much they throw a tantrum, if you just remember that it's better for them and you convey the message that it's just not an option, but there are these alternatives.
Yeah.
Most kids,
you really have to, you got to stick to it. You got to stick to your guns, and you have to just be like, that's what we're doing. And my perspective is sort of, if they're hungry enough, they'll eventually eat.
Right. Yeah.
And it's not to starve your children. Like you're saying, give them these options that are palatable, especially during the transitionary phase. But you got to prioritize the long-term health goal over a short-term mood issue.
Right. Exactly. Because there is what's it called? There is like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow or whatever. I can't think of a good analogy. It will get better.
Yeah.
As bad
the light at the end of the tunnel. And it
will
be a tunnel.
That's what I was looking for.
For a little while.
As bad as the kid is, as much as they're fighting you on it, you're still bigger and stronger, right? So they, if it's not an option, it's actually freeing for them, because then they don't have to throw a tantrum anymore, because they just know they're not going to, and they'll get to a place of acceptance sooner. And again, it's easier when they're younger. I've worked with teenagers where, maybe
they really have to be on board if they're that age. Yeah. Because they go out of the house, they go to school, they do all these things, and you're not in charge 100% of the time.
Yeah. And at that point, they're coming on adulthood. And so you kind of have to, in some ways, treat them like an adult, because they're in that transition period. But when they're a kid, if they're not able to go out and buy their own food, then as a parent, you have total control. and, obviously do it in a loving way, but just, you got to be really firm.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids have to know that it's just not an option. You convey that empathy, like you care about them, you still love them. Don't be harsh about it in any way, but just be like, I'm sorry, that's just not an option. We just
Mm-hmm.
can't do goldfish.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, you don't even have to focus on that. You can be firm and you want to communicate about it, but you don't have to brood over it either. There's ways to distract kids. There's other things that you can get their
Focus on the
attention.
positive.
Yeah, looking on the positive.
Make them some almond butter brownies or something.
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah,
mm-hmm.
Make it doable. So nutrition is such a big part of this. So that's probably the biggest thing that parents can do at home if they have any sort of issues with their kids' behavior, moods, or mentality, and things like that. Is there a direction that you would encourage them? I mean, you mentioned the paleo diet. Would you start there? Are there any resources that you would give them? And when should they seek out testing? Like, where's sort of the threshold of, okay, we've tried this a little bit, we're not seeing results, or I'm stuck, I should see a practitioner?
Well, in a sense, I think if you're concerned, it's always a good idea to see a practitioner. I think you can't be too safe that way. So I think it's always good to do that. It's good to get testing. I get testing on my own kids, and I usually feed them pretty well. So I just want to make sure that there's not anything going on, looking at their symptoms. If a kid I was concerned about a potential thyroid issue or something like that. And that's an example where if someone has a thyroid issue, depending on the issue, you could feed them anything. You could feed them the best food in the world and they're still going to have symptoms. So, so you're asking about threshold of where, if there's, it's hard. I think you should always be talking to your practitioner, but if there's nothing life threatening or, it's not too serious, then yeah, definitely go with a dietary change and see how that works. But, I envision a future where every practitioner knows these nutritional aspects to these things. And ideally, in an ideal world, you can take your kid to the pediatrician and they'll know. Mm-hmm. They'll have answers to it. Mm-hmm. That's just not the case now. I'm definitely, you still should take them to pediatrician because of course that's needed, for preventive measures. But it's, I think the low-hanging fruit is changing the diet in the sense that, there's really good resources out there. I'm sure you have good resources here on the podcast and on your blog and stuff. Good resources do that. But again, I can't think of an example where you wouldn't want to get a second opinion, especially if there are any concerns, no matter what it is. If your child has eczema, and you try something and they still have eczema, I think it would be good.
Right.
But if it fixes it, then yeah, problem solved, right?
Yeah. And just, reminding people too that it is an investment, but I mean, health is your whole life. If you feel like garbage, you can't invest in your work, you can't invest in your friendships. And I mean, particularly with kids, and what we're talking about, when it affects their moods and their brains, that affects their ability to focus in school, to develop relationships, to achieve the goals they want later in life. I've talked many times on the podcast about my son Keegan and the pretty drastic changes that we've been able to see with him. And, going from kind of moody and, cranky and, sort of tends towards depressive and that sort of thing, to energetic and happy and light, and the cloud has gone away and all this kind of stuff. And so it's like, you can tell with certain kids when they're exposed to things that their body doesn't like. And for a lot of them, it manifests in behavior and mood and thinking. And so I just, it's, as a parent, it's like you want to set them up for the best future and adulthood that they can possibly have. And so if that means that you invest in some testing annually to make sure they're on track, so be it. But it's just, it does take that being a priority for sure, and working your lifestyle around it so that can happen.
Exactly. Yeah. I can't emphasize that enough, just how much of a difference it can make.
Yeah.
Because if they have a learning disability that can be fixed through diet,
life-changing, literally life-changing.
Yeah.
Do you have any, client testimony? You don't have to use names or anything. Do you have any sort of client that sticks out to you that you'd like to share their story?
Yeah, I have a really good client, and she, single mom, 4 kids, and she is such a trooper because she just implemented everything. And it was really impressive how she did it. Her one son, she came to me because he had ADD, and turned out he had low iron. So for him, the iron was a huge help. If a kid doesn't have enough iron, their brain can't work. A lot of things can't work. Iron is used, it's not just used for oxygen delivery, but tons of different enzymes in the body use it. Iron's used to make neurotransmitters. It's one of the most, every mineral is important, but it's one of the most commonly low. And it's sad how it's not tested for.
Can I ask you a question about that? Do you think that's at all connected to the past 30 years or whatever it's been, where people are like, red meat gives you heart disease, and so maybe they're eating less red meat? Or do you think it's not connected?
Certainly people who don't eat red meat are more at risk to not having enough iron. And we see a lot of vegans and vegetarians that don't have enough iron. But we do see some vegan and vegetarians that do have enough iron. But it just, and everyone's different genetically, and there's a whole thing to that. But on average, if you're not eating enough meat, you're more likely to not get it. But then, anyway, I could go on and on about iron forever, but that was just the one thing. And, I explained to her, for ADD, there's certain dietary changes that can really help. And so she just ate it all up, and she implemented it. She learned about it. I sent her some cookbooks, and she totally changed her diet. She was standard American beforehand, and she changed her whole family over. And let me tell you, she was fatigued before this, and she was depressed herself. She didn't even come to me for herself. But her whole life changed. Her acne went away. She was happy. She was motivated. She was energetic. She's like, Nick, I'm happier than like my married ladies. And she's like, it's hard, to be a single mom, but she's like, I'm just so much energetic. Everyone's asking me what I did. I lost a ton of weight. And she's like, even my other kids, one had eczema, no longer has eczema. Another one couldn't sleep at night, was waking up every few hours, sleeping through the night now. And then, this other one, like, he's a really good kid, and he's actually really smart in school, but I can't even remember what if his issues was. Oh, he had trouble getting words out, But after they changed the diet, he's like so fluent,
Wow.
And he's able to talk.
Oh, that's amazing. He's the next president of the United States 20 years ago. All because he changed his diet. Wow, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So she really stands out. And again, it's because she really implemented it. And, and that's one thing I'm passionate about, is like, as a practitioner, I know it's hard to implement this stuff sometimes, I know for myself. I explained a little bit about that earlier. And, so I really want to make it easy for people to understand it. And that's why I appreciate what you do with a podcast, because I think it's such an amazing resource. People can just, pop in their earbuds and get some
drive in the car, learn all
passive
about it.
motivation, right?
Yeah.
Just listen and learn. And then it's like, oh, it makes it so easy. So I'm a big fan of education like this. I recorded videos for clients that, I'm concise. There's a lot of pictures, but just explaining like, this is how you do it. This is what you eat.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but it takes a village to raise a kid, right? There's, what everyone's doing to kind of get this information out there is super helpful. And, right. So, yeah. So she stands out. There's other ones as well. Postpartum depression is one that I'm interested in as well. I've had a few clients with that. Mm-hmm. And again, it's babies, they suck out all nutrients from the mother, right? But the main ones that they suck out are iron, zinc, omega-3, and probably iodine, and choline. So these kids, they need that. And then if the mother was suboptimal before or during pregnancy, then it is much more likely that they'll develop postpartum depression. So with them, again, it's ideal to get these tests done during pregnancy or even before, especially before pregnancy. But after pregnancy, if they're dealing with depression, just make sure their thyroid is working, make sure that they got enough iron and zinc, and that can make a big difference in their body's ability to produce progesterone and make them feel better.
I mean, think about, for those of you listening, just think about all the moments in your life that you've experienced anxiety or depression or lack of energy. And then think if you could have found, and how long that lasted and how frustrating it was in that period of your life. And if you can identify, I just need some niacin, or I need some magnesium, or I need some iron. And then you supplement with that, either through nutrition or supplementation. And, within a few days, you're seeing results. I mean, that's huge versus going to our doctor and being told that we have to be on an antidepressant for a minimum of a year to regulate our moods. What if it's as simple as some supplemental deficiencies and we can just fix that and move on with our lives and be aware of it? I mean, that's hugely powerful, I think.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, I could go on and on about neurotransmitters.
We're gonna have to do that. Yeah, we're gonna have to. I'll have to have you back on, and we'll talk about iron. We'll talk about supplements. We'll talk about all of that stuff. That would be really fun. But thank you so much for sharing your story and what parents can do now to start working with their kids. It's really an exciting area of information, I think, for a lot of people. So where can people find you? What's your website, and how can they connect with you?
My main website is mindwhale.com. That's mindwhale.com. And that site's more about the pediatric mental health. I also have a website, FX Wellness. That's the letter F, letter X, wellness.com. And that's where I have my courses that I recorded. I have a nutrition course and collaborated with a colleague on a functional fertility course. So women and men who are dealing with infertility, it walks you through all the aspects, testing, things like that for fertility, and of course, being ready to have a healthy baby. And then I have another course on there about environmental toxins. I didn't even talk about that, but that's huge in modern day. And there's simple steps we can do to avoid toxins. But the class it's like a really quick course on how to avoid toxins. So those are my two.
That's awesome.
Websites. Yeah.
Well, we'll make sure to have all those in the show notes too, so people can connect with you and learn more.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate you talking to me, and I hope that I provided the value that you were looking for, and hopefully this is helpful for
Oh
people.
no, this was great, and I'm so thankful that you were able to come on and talk to everybody today. And I will see you in October.
All right. Thanks, Ken.